Ethan Grant squinted against the blinding tropical sun as he stepped out of the airport shuttle, his wife Sophia at his side, and their two children, Mia and Lucas, bounding ahead with unrestrained excitement. The resort, Sunrise Sands, stood like a gleaming beacon of luxury, its towering whitewashed buildings shimmering under the clear sky. The air was thick with the scent of salt and hibiscus, mingling with the faint clatter of suitcases being wheeled across polished stone paths. "Can you believe we're finally here?" Sophia asked, her voice carrying the kind of lightness Ethan had missed in recent months. Her auburn hair glowed like copper in the sun, and her eyes, blue as the sea itself, danced with the promise of the rest they both desperately needed. "It's about time," Ethan replied, squeezing her hand as they walked. He cast a protective glance at Mia and Lucas, who had already reached the glass doors leading into the resort's opulent lobby. Despite the brightness of the day, a shadow of vigilance crept into his mind, an instinct honed by years in military intelligence and later in private security. Sunrise Sands was everything the brochures had promised, and more. The lobby was adorned with tropical blooms and sleek modern furniture, while floor-to-ceiling windows offered an uninterrupted view of the sprawling pools and the turquoise sea beyond. Mia, their eldest at 13, turned to her parents with an impatient grin. "Can we go to the pool now?" she begged, eyes gleaming with excitement. "First we check in," Sophia said, her tone warm but resolute. Lucas, only 9 but already trying to emulate his older sister's confidence, nodded vigorously, his dark curls bouncing with each movement. At the front desk, they were greeted by a concierge who moved with practiced efficiency. Ethan took note of the detail: the matching uniforms, the well-rehearsed smiles, the subtle security cameras tucked into the corners. It was habit, hardwired into him to assess every room like a potential threat. Once in their suite, Ethan allowed himself a rare moment of indulgence. The room was spacious, with a large balcony overlooking the main pool. A gentle breeze rustled the sheer white curtains, and for the first time in months, he felt a sliver of peace start to settle in. The next morning, Ethan woke to the sound of waves crashing against the shore and the laughter of early risers filtering up from below. Mia was already tugging at her swimsuit, eyes alight with anticipation. "Hurry up, Dad! We promised we'd go early." Sophia gave Ethan a knowing look, slipping her hand into his. "Let's make today count," she whispered. He nodded, grateful for her ability to anchor him. Down at the pool, the resort bustled with activity. Umbrellas and lounge chairs peppered the white stone deck, and families mingled as children splashed and played. It was there, at the Lifeguard stand, that Ethan first noticed him. Kyle Tanner, with a muscular build and sun-bleached hair, sat slouched in his chair, sunglasses masking his eyes. Something in his posture was off, a disinterest that bordered on disdain. "Dad, look!" Lucas shouted, diving into the shallow end with a whoop. Mia followed, her practiced strokes cutting through the water with ease. Ethan's mouth lifted in a smile as he watched them, but his eyes strayed back to Kyle, who was now glancing their way, his expression unreadable. Over the next few days, Kyle's presence became a fixture at the pool. Ethan caught glimpses of his cold stare, the way it lingered on his family as if appraising them. At first, Ethan brushed it off as paranoia. He was here to relax, to let go of the constant hyper-awareness that came with his line of work. But as the days passed, it grew harder to ignore. During a quiet moment, Ethan leaned over to Sophia. "Have you noticed that lifeguard?" he murmured. She glanced over, seeing Kyle standing at the edge of the pool, arms crossed. "Maybe he's just serious about his job," she suggested, though there was a flicker of doubt in her eyes. Mia, oblivious to the tension, practiced her underwater flips and races, her laughter bright against the backdrop of the resort. Ethan's chest tightened. He wanted this joy, this safety, for her, without worry gnawing at the edges. One afternoon, as Ethan helped Lucas adjust his floaties, Kyle passed by close enough for Ethan to hear him mutter, "Some people just don't belong here." The words were low, carried by a voice that dripped with something bitter and sharp. Ethan's jaw clenched. He turned slowly, his eyes meeting Kyle's behind those mirrored sunglasses. "Did you say something?" Ethan asked, his tone calm but steely. Kyle gave a slow, insolent smile. "Just talking to myself," he said, voice loud enough for a few heads to turn. Without waiting for a response, he walked back to his post. Sophia touched Ethan's arm. "Let it go," she whispered, her voice soft, pleading. But the tension was already thrumming through him, hot and insistent. The days continued, marked by the predictable rhythm of sun and laughter. Mia thrived in the water, impressing other families with her natural ease. "She should be on a swim team," one father remarked, as Ethan helped Mia out of the pool. "She already is," Ethan replied, pride flaring in his voice. He caught Kyle watching them again, his expression hardening, and the moment soured. Ethan tried to shake off the unease. He wanted to give his children this escape, to shed the seriousness that often defined him. But Kyle's presence, his sharp eyes and subtle sneers, kept the shadows from entirely lifting. The morning of the last day of their first week dawned with a brightness that seemed to promise nothing but joy. Mia and Lucas raced each other down the pathway to the pool, giggling as they ran. Ethan followed at a slower pace, Sophia's hand tucked in his. But as they arrived, Ethan noticed Kyle's posture stiffen, the lifeguard's gaze locking onto Mia with an intensity that sent a chill down Ethan's spine. Ethan tried to push aside the unease as the morning unfolded, but his instincts refused to quiet. He settled into a lounge chair next to Sophia, determined to keep a watchful eye on the children as they played in the water. Lucas, with his carefree abandon, was busy splashing and laughing, while Mia glided through the water, her strokes powerful and confident. Out of the corner of his eye, Ethan noticed Kyle shift positions. The lifeguard leaned against the railing of his chair, removing his sunglasses to reveal eyes that were startlingly cold. Their gazes met, and the silent message in Kyle's eyes was unmistakable. Ethan's jaw tightened, a ripple of anger disturbing his focus. Sophia noticed his distraction. "You're staring at him again," she said softly, her voice carrying both concern and exhaustion. Ethan sighed, rubbing a hand over his face. "I can't help it. Something about him feels wrong. He's..." Watching her, Sophia, "It's not normal." Sophia followed his gaze and frowned. "Maybe he's just strict. We're at a resort, Ethan. Let's try to let this go. For Mia, for Lucas." But Ethan couldn't shake the feeling that this was more than a lifeguard's usual vigilance. The sun beat down with relentless warmth, casting glimmers of light across the blue pool water. Mia raced another girl she'd befriended, their laughter ringing out as they reached the far end. Ethan felt a brief surge of pride watching her, recalling how hours of early morning practices and determination had made her into the swimmer she was. Kyle's voice interrupted the thought. "Hey kids, slow down. This isn't a competition," he called, the tone sharp enough to make a few parents turn their heads. Mia paused, glancing at him with a puzzled frown. Ethan's eyes narrowed. Kyle's rebuke hadn't sounded like a lifeguard's routine caution. It carried a distinct edge. He exchanged a look with Sophia, who now wore a matching line of worry on her brow. "Mia, come here for a second," Ethan called, trying to keep his voice light. She swam over, wiping water from her face, her cheeks flushed with effort. "What is it, Dad?" she asked, her smile still intact but tinged with confusion. Ethan ruffled her hair. "Nothing, sweetheart. Just checking in. You're doing great." Kyle's stare burned into them from across the deck, and Ethan felt his pulse spike. This time, it wasn't just suspicion. It was a certainty that something was wrong. As the day wore on, Ethan became more resolute. He decided to talk to a few other parents to gauge if anyone else had noticed Kyle's behavior. By the snack bar, he struck up a conversation with Jim Collins, a father of 2 boys, whom he'd chatted with earlier in the week. "Hey, Jim, can I ask you something?" Ethan said, keeping his tone casual. "Sure," Jim replied, sipping his drink. "What's up?" "That lifeguard, Kyle. Have you noticed anything strange about him?" Ethan gestured subtly in Kyle's direction. Jim's brows knitted together as he followed Ethan's line of sight. "Yeah, now that you mention it. He's different. Always seems on edge, doesn't he? And I swear, He's made a couple of comments that rubbed me the wrong way." Ethan nodded, a cold knot forming in his stomach. He wasn't the only one who saw it. Meanwhile, at the pool, Mia was climbing out of the water, her laughter replaced by a tired smile. Kyle's eyes tracked her movement, his mouth set in a tight line. Ethan turned back to Jim, determination hardening his voice. "If this keeps up, I'm going to talk to management." Jim exhaled and gave a brief nod. "I'd back you up on that." From across the pool deck, Kyle shifted, as if sensing their scrutiny. For the first time, Ethan saw something new in his expression, a smirk that sent a chill down his spine. It was then that Ethan realized this was no longer just his overprotective nature. This was real, and he needed to be ready for whatever came next. The sun was beginning to dip toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink as the resort bustled with guests transitioning from the pool to dinner. Ethan sat next to Sophia on their suite's balcony, a chilled drink in hand. Below them, the pool area began to empty, but a few families, including their own, lingered to savor the last light of the day. Lucas sat on the edge of the pool, kicking his legs in the water while Mia swam slow, easy laps. The evening air was warm, cradling the echoes of laughter and the soft splashes of swimmers. For a brief moment, Ethan felt his tension ease, and he turned to Sophia with a smile that came more easily than he expected. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said, resting her head on his shoulder. "It is," he agreed, but his eyes drifted back to Kyle's lifeguard stand, now bathed in the glow of the setting sun. Kyle leaned on the railing, his posture casual but eyes sharp, still fixed on the pool. The golden hour seemed to amplify the beauty of the resort. Mia, pushing herself to swim one last lap, dove under the water, her silhouette gliding just beneath the surface. Lucas giggled as he splashed at the water, sending ripples that caught the light. Suddenly, Ethan noticed Kyle move, standing straighter, the nonchalant air replaced by an alert stillness. Ethan's senses prickled with unease. He stood up, leaning forward over the balcony rail, every muscle tensed. "Mia, come back to the shallow end," Sophia called, sensing Ethan's unease. Mia surfaced halfway across the pool and waved, but as she turned to make her way back, she jerked suddenly, her face contorting in pain. Ethan's heart stopped. He recognized the movement, a muscle cramp, sudden and debilitating. Mia's hand clutched at her leg as she sank below the surface, her head barely breaking through to gasp for air before the water swallowed her again. "Ethan!" Sophia screamed, already on her feet. Ethan bolted, the drink forgotten as it shattered on the floor behind him. He was down the stairs and across the pool deck in seconds, his vision narrowing to the spot where Mia struggled. But Kyle didn't move. The lifeguard stood frozen, eyes narrowed, mouth set in that infuriatingly cold line. The few guests who noticed what was happening looked to him first, expecting action. But he stayed rooted to the spot, unmoving. "Move!" Ethan shouted as he dove into the water, the sound of splashing and muffled shouts fading under the water's cool embrace. He pushed through the water with powerful strokes, reaching Mia just as her movements weakened. Her eyes were wide with panic as he wrapped an arm around her, kicking forcefully to bring them both to the surface. The rush of air as they broke through was sharp and immediate, filled with Mia's gasping breaths and the sudden noise of the crowd. Sophia was at the pool's edge, arms outstretched, her face a mask of fear. Ethan passed Mia up to her, trembling but safe, before hoisting himself out of the pool. He took a deep, steadying breath before turning to Kyle, whose expression hadn't changed. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Ethan shouted, fury crackling in his voice. Kyle's jaw tightened. He shifted his weight but said nothing, the silence louder than any words. A few parents moved closer, their whispers sharp in the evening air. Sophia cradled Mia, who clung to her mother, sobs shaking her slender frame. The sight spurred Ethan's anger, turning it into something hot and uncontainable. Ethan stormed toward Kyle, stopping just inches from the lifeguard stand. "You saw her struggling. Why didn't you do anything?" His fists were clenched, body vibrating with the effort to keep himself from grabbing the man. Kyle's eyes met Ethan's, flat and unfazed. I didn't see it until it was too late, he said, his tone dismissive. That's a lie, shouted Jim Collins, who had seen the entire scene unfold. The gathered crowd murmured in agreement. The resort's manager, Helen Brooks, arrived, flanked by two other staff members. She quickly assessed the scene, her expression shifting from alarm to forced calm. Mr. Grant, what's going on here? Ethan pointed at Kyle, the weight of his rage heavy in his voice. He let my daughter nearly drown. He stood there and did nothing. Helen's eyes flicked to Kyle, who now showed the faintest hint of discomfort. Kyle, please step down and come with me, she ordered. The lifeguard scoffed but followed her, muttering something that only Ethan caught. You people always make a scene. The implication stung, leaving Ethan standing motionless as Helen led Kyle away. The pool area buzzed with whispers, parents pulling their children closer, and the evening's peace shattered beyond repair. The night was no longer filled with the soothing sounds of waves and laughter. Instead, the resort pulsed with tension. Ethan, his shirt still clinging wetly to his chest, stood watching Helen Brooks lead Kyle away. Anger simmered just beneath his skin, boiling and raw. Sophia's voice, low and urgent, brought him back. We need to get Mia inside. She's shaking. Ethan nodded, his focus shifting to his daughter. Mia's usually bright eyes were dull with exhaustion and fear, her small frame trembling in Sophia's protective embrace. The crowd began to disperse as murmurs of concern and judgment whispered across the pool deck. Back in their suite, Lucas sat wide-eyed on the edge of the bed, absorbing the tension that gripped the room. Ethan knelt in front of Mia, wiping a strand of damp hair from her face. Are you okay, sweetheart? He asked, his voice unsteady. She nodded hesitantly, but her eyes welled up. I got a cramp. I couldn't move, Dad. I was so scared. I know, Ethan said, swallowing the knot in his throat. But you're safe now. I won't let anything happen to you. Sophia, sitting beside Mia, looked up at Ethan. Her face was drawn with worry, but there was something else, a question that went unspoken. Ethan answered it with a subtle shake of his head. No, this wasn't over. The next morning, Ethan woke early. Shadows still cast long across the resort grounds. Sleep had come in fragmented pieces, disrupted by the image of Mia struggling in the water and Kyle's blank, unmoving stare. He knew he needed answers. Dressed and determined, Ethan made his way to the resort's main office. The lobby was quiet, its usual brightness muted under the early morning light. Helen Brooks was already there, her sharp features softened by fatigue. She looked up as he approached, the professionalism in her expression barely masking her discomfort. Mr. Grant, she started, folding her hands in front of her, I want to assure you that we're investigating what happened yesterday. Kyle has been temporarily suspended pending review. That's not good enough, Ethan said, his tone low but forceful. He didn't just fail at his job, he watched and did nothing. This isn't negligence, it's something deeper. Helen sighed, glancing at a stack of papers on her desk. We take guest safety very seriously, Mr. Grant, but we also need to follow due process. I need time to gather information. Ethan's patience snapped. Time? My daughter nearly drowned because your lifeguard stood by with a smirk on his face. If you don't take this seriously, I will. Helen's eyes darkened, and for a moment they stared at each other, the room thick with unspoken challenges. Ethan returned to the pool area, now eerily calm in the early light. A few early risers splashed quietly, unaware or indifferent to the turmoil from the night before. He scanned the familiar faces of guests he had come to recognize over the past week and spotted Jim Collins sipping coffee near the bar. Jim waved him over, his face marked with the same fatigue Ethan felt. How's your daughter? He asked. Better, thanks, Ethan replied, sitting down. But I need to find out more about Kyle. You said you've noticed him acting off. What did you mean by that? Jim took a long sip before answering. He's been here a while. My family comes to Sunrise Sands every year, and Kyle's always been different. Standoffish, sure, but this is the first time I've seen him act so hostile. He made a few comments last year that seemed out of place, but we brushed them off. Ethan leaned in, the weight of confirmation settling heavily. Comments like what? Jim glanced around before lowering his voice. About certain guests? He didn't seem to think everyone belonged here, if you catch my drift. It was subtle, but enough that a few people noticed. The management's never done anything about it. A cold anger seeped into Ethan's bones. It wasn't just him, there was a pattern. A reason Kyle's stare had felt more than indifferent. It was deliberate. Ethan returned to the suite with renewed purpose. Sophia sat at the small table by the window, watching Mia and Lucas play a quiet game of cards. She looked up as he entered, reading the storm on his face before he spoke. "What is it, Ethan?" she asked. "Jim Collins mentioned something important," he said, pacing the room. "Kyle's behavior isn't new. There's a history of this, subtle enough that management hasn't acted, but obvious enough that some guests noticed." Sophia frowned, the implication dawning on her. "Are you saying this wasn't just negligence?" "I'm saying it was intentional. I need to find more proof before management sweeps this under the rug." Sophia stood, crossing the room to place a hand on his arm. "You can't do this alone, Ethan. We're not home. We don't know who we can trust here." "I know," he said, his gaze softening for a moment. "But I have to try." Ethan's frustration gnawed at him as he sat in the suite that afternoon, reviewing everything he knew about Kyle. It wasn't enough to rely on the unsettling feeling in his gut. He needed concrete evidence, something that would compel the resort to take real action. Just as he was about to leave for another conversation with guests by the pool, his phone buzzed. "Ethan Grant?" The voice on the other end was firm but familiar. It belonged to Detective Marquez, an old friend from his military intelligence days who now worked in the area. "I heard about the incident through a mutual contact. If you need help digging up some background on this lifeguard, I'm available." Relief surged through Ethan like a wave. "Marquez, I need anything you can find. There's something seriously wrong with this guy." "Consider it done. I'll call you as soon as I have anything concrete," Marquez assured. Ethan hung up, hope threading through the tension that had gripped him for days. He glanced over at Sophia, who was sitting by the window, watching the kids play cards on the bed. She met his eyes, her expression a mix of support and worry. "Help is on the way," he said, and she nodded, understanding that this wasn't just about what had happened. It was about ensuring it wouldn't happen again. The sun had set by the time Marquez called back. Ethan stepped outside onto the suite's balcony, the breeze carrying the scent of salt and the distant hum of waves. "I found something, Ethan," Marquez said, his tone grave. "Your instincts were right. Kyle Tanner has a history. Complaints filed at his previous jobs, incidents that were brushed off or handled internally. There's one in particular, a near-identical situation at a resort 2 years ago, but the victim's parents were too intimidated to press it." Ethan's knuckles whitened as he gripped the balcony railing. Why wasn't he flagged? Small resorts often cut corners. A reference from someone high up covered for him, but that's not all. "I found online activity. Posts that suggest he's part of a group that espouses dangerous beliefs. It's subtle, but it's there." Ethan closed his eyes, letting the enormity of it sink in. It wasn't just negligence. It was intentional. "Thanks, Marquez," he said, voice tight with controlled anger. "This is exactly what I needed." "Be careful, Ethan," Marquez warned. "People like him don't back down easily." Early the next morning, Ethan stood outside Helen Brooks' office, the folder Marquez sent him clenched in his hand. He knocked firmly and entered without waiting for a response. Helen looked up, startled by his sudden entrance, but the surprise quickly turned to guarded annoyance. "Mr. Grant, I hope this is important," she said, already reaching for the composed mask she wore so well. "It is," Ethan said, placing the folder on her desk with more force than necessary. "This is what you need to know about your lifeguard, Kyle Tanner." Helen opened the folder, her eyes widening as she scanned the documents. Her fingers, usually so controlled, trembled slightly. "I had no idea." "Oh," Ethan leaned forward, his voice steely. "Now you do. And if you don't take immediate public action, I will make sure every guest here knows exactly who was trusted with their safety." Helen's face fell, and for a moment the mask slipped. She nodded slowly. "You're right. We need to handle this immediately." By midday, the resort issued an official statement. Kyle Tanner had been terminated, and all staff would undergo comprehensive reviews and training. An emergency meeting was called, where Helen stood before the guests and staff in the main hall. Her expression was firm but strained. "We deeply regret the incident that occurred and the oversight in our hiring practices," she said, looking out over the sea of concerned faces. "Effective immediately, we are implementing a new standard of background checks and staff training focused on safety and inclusivity." Whispers turned into nods and murmurs of approval. Some guests approached Ethan after the meeting, shaking his hand and thanking him for speaking up. "You did what most wouldn't," Jim Collins said, patting him on the back. "We all owe you for that." Ethan acknowledged the praise, but inside, he felt a mix of relief and lingering anger. This fight was about more than just his family. It was about ensuring this never happened again. That night, the resort returned to a semblance of normalcy, but Ethan knew better than to think the issue was entirely behind them. He sat on the beach, the stars overhead reflecting on the dark water. Sophia joined him, wrapping a light shawl around her shoulders as she settled next to him. "You did the right thing," she said, leaning her head against his shoulder. "It doesn't feel like enough," Ethan admitted, the tide of guilt still lapping at the edges of his mind. "Mia could have, but she didn't," Sophia said softly, "because you were there. And now you've made sure this place will be safer for everyone who comes here." Ethan squeezed her hand, the tension in his chest finally loosening. The next morning, Mia stood by the pool, watching the water. Her fear was evident, but so was her resolve. She glanced at her father, who stood beside her, and took a deep breath. "Dad, I'm going to try again," she said, voice steady despite the fear flickering in her eyes. Ethan felt a swell of pride. "You're braver than I ever was at your age," he said with a smile. Mia stepped into the water, letting the coolness embrace her. She took a moment, eyes closed, before pushing off from the side. Her strokes were strong, determined, cutting through the water with the grace Ethan loved watching. As she completed a lap and looked up at her parents, a smile broke out on her face. The fear was gone, replaced by the quiet triumph of facing down a shadow. Over the next few days, Sunrise Sands changed. New lifeguards, carefully vetted, took their places around the pool. Guests felt a renewed sense of security, and the resort staff were more attentive than ever. The resort's decision to terminate Kyle and announce new safety protocols was met with praise, drawing attention from local media. Ethan was approached by a journalist one morning. "Mr. Grant, would you be willing to share your story? We're looking at how this could impact hiring practices across other resorts." He hesitated for a moment, looking at Sophia, who nodded encouragingly. "If it helps ensure this never happens to another family, then yes." As they prepared to leave, Ethan received a call from Marquez. "Local authorities have taken interest in the case. Kyle is under investigation, and there may be repercussions for those who enabled him." Ethan felt a deep sense of satisfaction. It wasn't just about the resort anymore. It was about broader accountability. He told Sophia, who wrapped her arms around him, "You've done more than protect your family, Ethan. You've changed things." The Grants' last evening at Sunrise Sands was bittersweet. Mia played with Lucas by the pool, her laughter carrying across the water, clear and light. Ethan watched, the tension of the past days finally easing as he saw his children's joy returning. Sophia touched his arm. "Look at them," she said, eyes bright with emotion. "That's because of you." "No," Ethan said, a rare smile breaking through. "That's because of us." Back home, the days slipped into a familiar rhythm. But the experience left its mark. Mia returned to her swim practices with a renewed spirit, stronger and more confident than ever. Lucas spoke with pride about his sister and their father, the hero of the story. Ethan started receiving messages from guests who had been at the resort, sharing how the experience inspired them to speak up or take action in their own lives. It was a reminder that what had started as a fight for his family had rippled outward. Sitting on their porch one evening, Ethan stared out at the fading sunset, his mind on everything that had happened. The echoes of the past week lingered, but so did a sense of purpose. He knew that this fight, this vigilance, couldn't end at the resort. It was something he carried now, a part of who he was. A protector, not just of his own, but of anyone who needed it. Sophia joined him, handing him a cup of tea. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "That even in places meant for peace, there's always a reason to stay aware," he said, squeezing her hand. "And that some battles are worth fighting, even on vacation." She smiled, leaning her head on his shoulder as the last light faded. "As long as we're together, I know we'll be okay." Ethan nodded, feeling the warmth of their home and the resolve in his heart. They would always stand strong, facing whatever came next, together. Ethan sat at his desk late into the night, the glow of his laptop casting long shadows across the room. The house was quiet, save for the rhythmic tick of the hallway clock and the occasional rustle as Sophia shifted in bed. Despite the calm, Ethan's mind churned. The events at Sunrise Sands had stirred something deep within him, an insistent need for answers that went beyond just his family's safety. He scanned through reports Marquez had sent, piecing together a mosaic of information on Kyle Tanner. The lifeguard's history was marred with whispers of neglect, incidents glossed over by management, and complaints that never made it past the first desk. It wasn't enough to prove intent, but it painted a damning picture. A creak in the doorway made him look up. Sophia stood there, her silhouette framed by the soft hallway light. "Ethan, it's 3 in the morning. Come to bed." He rubbed his eyes, exhaustion pulling at him. "I can't, Soph. There's more to this. I know it." She walked over and rested a hand on his shoulder, warmth cutting through the tension. "Then we find out together." The following day, Ethan reached out to his network, drawing on contacts from his days in military intelligence. By evening, a call from Marquez confirmed his suspicions. Kyle Tanner had a trail that spanned across several resorts, each with its own story of passive-aggressive behavior and failures to act when it counted. "Ethan," Marquez's voice crackled over the line, "this isn't just one mistake. It's a pattern. I've managed to track down a few former colleagues of his willing to talk." "Set it up," Ethan said, a new fire lighting in his chest. "I need their stories." The next week was filled with phone calls and quiet meetings. One evening he spoke to Derek Milson, who had worked alongside Kyle 3 years prior. "Look, I left that job because of him," Derek confessed. It wasn't just his attitude. He made it clear who he didn't think belonged around his pool. Management turned a blind eye, too worried about keeping things quiet. Ethan's jaw clenched as Derek's story confirmed what he'd feared. Kyle's actions weren't random. They were deliberate, fueled by a belief that certain people didn't deserve the same vigilance. Another call led to Jessica Reed, a former manager at a small resort. "We had complaints, but Kyle's references checked out," she said, frustration in her voice. "It was only after he left that we realized those references were from people who wanted to get rid of him." Sophia, listening from across the room, shared Ethan's look of disbelief. "How did no one catch this before?" she murmured. "They didn't want to," Ethan answered, his tone steely. With testimonies collected and Marquez's help in acquiring supporting evidence, Ethan and Sophia knew it was time to escalate. They met with Angela Cortez from Safe Shores, who was moved by the overwhelming proof of systemic failures. "This could shake the industry," Angela said, tapping the stack of papers Ethan had brought. "We need to go public, push for reforms." Ethan exchanged a glance with Sophia. This wasn't just about Kyle anymore. It was about the blind spots in the system that allowed him to thrive. Angela's connections turned out to be invaluable. Within days, Ethan was contacted by Daily Horizon, a major news network looking to feature their story. The interview was scheduled in a small studio, the kind of place where stories often turned into movements. The journalist, Camille Wade, was sharp-eyed and direct. "Ethan, you knew this wouldn't be easy, going up against the resort industry. What made you decide to pursue it?" Ethan's gaze didn't waver. "Because this isn't just about one lifeguard who failed at his job. It's about a system that enabled him, that put my daughter and countless others at risk." The interview aired a week later, drawing national attention. Emails and messages flooded in from families who'd experienced similar moments of negligence, their gratitude tinged with a shared frustration. The #ProtectOurResorts hashtag started trending, turning a single story into a movement. The backlash against Sunrise Sands and other resorts that had employed Kyle was immediate. Parents demanded answers. Advocacy groups amplified the call for mandatory safety training. And lawmakers began discussions on new regulations for the hospitality industry. Ethan and Sophia received invitations to join panels and discussions about resort safety. They spoke with a confidence born from their ordeal, turning their pain into purpose. Mia, who had watched the media coverage with a mixture of pride and lingering fear, came up to her father one evening. "Does this mean it's over, Dad? No one else will have to go through this?" Ethan knelt, meeting her eyes. "It means we're making sure of it, one step at a time." The growing pressure forced Sunrise Sands to host a public meeting with shareholders and advocates. Ethan and Sophia attended, accompanied by Angela and other Safe Shores representatives. The room was filled with anticipation, a mixture of tension and hope crackling in the air. Charles Henson, head of operations, spoke first. His speech was polished, carefully measured. "We are here to acknowledge mistakes and to commit to new standards for guest safety." Angela cut in, her voice unwavering. "Commitments are words. We need actions. Policies that hold people accountable. Background checks that don't just rely on paper trails." Ethan took the floor next, holding up a printed copy of the testimonies they'd collected. "These aren't just isolated incidents. They're proof of systemic failure. We need transparency, and we need it now." The room was silent as Charles took a deep breath, nodding reluctantly. "We will open an independent investigation and partner with organizations like Safe Shores for ongoing training." As word spread about the commitments made during the meeting, Ethan felt a mix of satisfaction and exhaustion. For weeks, they juggled interviews, meetings, and calls with other families. It was as if their lives had become an extension of the fight they started at the resort. Sophia, who had taken on coordinating Safe Shores' outreach program, managed a growing online community. "Parents are learning what to look for now," she said one night, showing Ethan comments from a forum post. "They're asking questions, demanding better." Ethan's pride in her and their shared work filled him with renewed energy. "This is bigger than us now," he said, their hands intertwined. An update from Marquez brought news Ethan had been waiting for. Kyle Tanner had been located and faced charges of negligence related to his employment. The investigation had uncovered that several resorts knowingly hired him, complicit in maintaining silence to avoid bad publicity. "It won't be a long trial," Marquez said over the phone, "but it will set a precedent." Ethan relayed the news to Sophia, who exhaled in relief. "Maybe now he'll face what he's done," she said. "And maybe it'll stop the next one," Ethan added, determination etched into every word. The trial was covered widely, the courtroom packed with media, parents, and advocates. Ethan sat in the gallery, watching as former colleagues of Kyle testified to his behavior. The prosecution made it clear that his negligence wasn't incidental, it was willful. Kyle's defense argued mitigating factors, but the jury's verdict came swift and decisive. Guilty on multiple counts of negligence. Sentencing followed, ensuring that he would not work in a position of authority again. When the gavel fell, a collective breath was released in the room. Ethan felt a weight lift, though he knew the fight for broader change continued. With the trial concluded, Safe Shores used the momentum to propose comprehensive reforms to state legislators. Ethan and Sophia attended hearings, sharing their story to humanize the issue. "Safety isn't a privilege," Ethan said at one hearing. "It's a right, and it starts with the policies we enforce." The legislation proposed included stricter background checks, mandatory diversity and safety training, and penalties for negligence. Months after the trial, Ethan received a formal letter from Sunrise Sands. The resort had completed its internal investigation and was enacting new policies inspired by recommendations from Safe Shores. Helen Brooks, who had navigated the fallout with newfound resolve, invited the Grants back for a ceremony recognizing the changes. At first, Ethan was hesitant, the memories still raw. But Sophia convinced him, "We need to see the change we fought for." The Grants arrived at Sunrise Sands under different circumstances. The air was filled with warmth and chatter, but this time there was no underlying tension. Helen greeted them with genuine gratitude, and Charles Henson addressed the crowd. "This journey started with a failure," Charles said, nodding to Ethan. "But it is ending in hope, thanks to those who refuse to stay silent." Mia stood by the pool, now confident, and glanced at her father with a smile. The echoes of fear that once haunted the space were gone. The evening turned into a celebration, guests mingling with advocates and staff who had committed to new standards. Ethan met with other families who had followed the story and took comfort in knowing their ordeal had sparked awareness. Angela approached with a knowing smile. "You realize this is just the beginning, right?" Ethan chuckled, glancing at Sophia. "I wouldn't have it any other way." Life gradually settled, but it was never quite the same. Ethan continued consulting for Safe Shores. Using his expertise to help assess resort safety, Sophia expanded her role, coordinating partnerships and speaking at conferences. One afternoon, an invitation arrived, an industry panel in Washington, D.C., to discuss the legislation inspired by their efforts. "We need to go," Sophia insisted. "It's the culmination of everything." They attended, speaking alongside Angela and other advocates. The proposed changes were now being adopted nationally, a testament to their perseverance. Mia grew into her teenage years with an indomitable spirit. She took part in swim meets with the same determination she showed at Sunrise Sands, and Lucas followed her lead, developing his own love for the sport. During one meet, an older coach pulled Ethan aside. "Your daughter's story is an inspiration, you know. She doesn't just swim, she teaches courage." Ethan's heart swelled with pride. It wasn't just about what they'd faced, it was about what they'd become. The nonprofit organization Safe Stays launched officially the following year, a collaboration between the grants, Safe Shores, and other advocates. Their mission was simple: to ensure that what had happened to Mia would never happen again. Ethan traveled often, inspecting resorts, consulting on safety, and spreading their message. Sophia managed outreach, balancing work with family seamlessly. Safe Stays became a recognized name, and Ethan was approached to write about their experiences. The resulting book, Vigilance by the Shore, chronicled their journey and the fight for safety and justice. It resonated with families and professionals alike, reinforcing the idea that one voice could start a movement. Years later, as Ethan watched Mia prepare for her last high school swim meet, memories of that day at Sunrise Sands surfaced. The fear, the anger, and the resolve all converged, but they felt different now. Softer, framed by a sense of achievement. Sophia leaned in, squeezing his hand. "We did good, didn't we?" Ethan smiled, watching Mia dive into the water, her form perfect, cutting through the past and into a future that promised safety, courage, and unity. "We did more than good. We changed everything." Years passed, but the story of what happened at Sunrise Sands remained more than a memory. It was a touchstone for change. The nonprofit organization Safe Stays had evolved from a grassroots movement into an internationally recognized advocate for resort safety. Resorts from Europe to Asia sought their guidance, eager to implement policies that mirrored those inspired by the grant's ordeal. Ethan found himself at conferences and training sessions, speaking to hospitality leaders and safety officials. He shared stories not only of what happened, but of what could happen when vigilance and proactive measures were ignored. Each time, he felt the ripple of their advocacy extending further. Sophia played an equally vital role, crafting programs that educated families on safety awareness when traveling. She developed partnerships with tourism boards and wrote articles that appeared in popular travel magazines, always weaving in the story that had begun as a nightmare but turned into a rallying cry for change. Mia's confidence blossomed over the years. Now, in her final year of high school, she was not only a star swimmer but also an advocate, speaking at schools about the importance of standing up against complacency and bias. Lucas, inspired by his sister and parents, volunteered at local community centers, teaching water safety to younger children. One day, after one of Mia's swim meets where she'd set a new record, she sat beside Ethan in the stands. The cheers of her teammates faded as she looked at him with the same resolve he'd seen on that fateful day at the resort. "Dad," she began, eyes sparkling, I want to study law. I want to help people who don't have someone to fight for them." Ethan's throat tightened with pride. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You already are, Mia." The culmination of years of work came when Safe Stays received international recognition at a global safety summit. The organization was awarded for its commitment to making hospitality venues safer and more inclusive. Ethan stood on stage with Sophia beside him, their hands clasped as applause filled the hall. In his acceptance speech, Ethan's voice was steady but thick with emotion. "What started with one moment of terror for our family became a mission. Safety is not a luxury, it is a right, and we will keep fighting to make sure every family everywhere can trust that right." The recognition renewed their energy. New chapters of Safe Stays were opened in different countries, each carrying the message that one family's determination could inspire global change. The changes spurred by their efforts were felt far and wide. Resorts that had once resisted the idea of stringent safety protocols now sought Safe Stays audits. Hotels added diversity and inclusivity training. Learning that safety extended beyond Lifeguard stands to include how staff viewed and treated their guests. One morning, a letter arrived from an unexpected source. Charles Henson, now retired but still involved in industry consulting. "Ethan and Sophia," it read, "your fight made me re-examine not just the policies, but the purpose of our work. I'm proud to have witnessed the start of this movement, and prouder still to see where it has gone." Sophia smiled as she read the letter aloud, a silent acknowledgement that even those who had once stood in their way could change. Mia left for college to study law, her ambition fueled by the legacy of her parents' work. Lucas, now a teenager, began training to become a lifeguard himself, determined to uphold the standards his family had set. Ethan watched them grow with a mixture of pride and nostalgia. He and Sophia continued their work, but now they saw the baton being passed. The legacy living on not just through them, but through their children and the countless people who had joined their cause. On the anniversary of Safe Stays' founding, the Grants hosted a gathering at their home. Friends, allies, and families they'd met over the years filled their backyard, laughter and conversation weaving through the warm evening air. Angela Cortez raised a toast, her smile broad as she looked at Ethan and Sophia. "To the Grants," she said, "for reminding us that courage can start with a single step, and justice with a single voice." As glasses clinked and the celebration hummed around them, Ethan turned to Sophia, their eyes meeting in a shared moment of understanding. They had faced down fear, challenged indifference, and sparked a movement that would outlast them. And as Mia, Lucas, and the new generation of advocates stepped into their own, the future looked bright, a testament to the idea that one act of vigilance could ripple into lasting change. As Safe Stays solidified its influence in the hospitality industry, new challenges emerged. Resorts outside of popular vacation hubs in less regulated regions proved resistant to change, often citing logistical and financial constraints. Ethan and Sophia knew they needed a different approach for these areas. One evening, while reviewing reports on their deck under the glow of warm string lights, Sophia suggested an idea that sparked excitement. "What if we partner with local NGOs and community leaders? They know their people better and can help us adapt our training to local cultures." Ethan nodded, the gears in his mind turning. "That's it? We need allies who are already trusted." Emails were sent, calls made, and soon Safe Stays was in discussions with partners across continents. These collaborations aim to customize safety programs, emphasizing cultural respect while upholding rigorous safety and anti-discrimination standards. Their first major partnership was with Sahara Shield, an NGO focused on developing safer community practices in North Africa. The organization's leader, Amira Hassan, was a formidable advocate known for her relentless dedication. She invited Ethan and Sophia to a summit in Marrakesh to present Safe Stays' mission. The atmosphere was electric when they arrived. The room buzzed with the hum of simultaneous translations as leaders from various sectors met, some skeptical, others intrigued. Amira introduced Ethan, her words carrying an authority that stilled the crowd. Ethan stepped forward, adjusting his tie and taking a breath. Safety is not a concept bound by borders or cultures. It's a universal right. And while change may come at a cost, the cost of ignoring it is far greater. Applause broke out, hesitant at first, but soon growing. Amira leaned over and whispered, "You've made your mark, Ethan. Now let's cement it." The following months were a blur of travel, workshops, and late-night strategy sessions. Safe Stays launched pilot programs in regions that had been previously untouched by such initiatives. In Indonesia, the partnership with a local tourism council led to the adoption of training protocols that combined traditional hospitality with modern safety standards. In Brazil, resorts along the coast began employing bilingual safety officers, ensuring clear communication in emergencies. But not every endeavor was met with open arms. In one Caribbean country, a prominent resort owner dismissed their efforts, arguing that tourism was already stretched thin without additional expenses. Ethan found himself back in boardrooms, facing down CEOs who viewed safety as secondary to profit. "We're not asking you to choose between safety and your bottom line," Ethan said firmly in one heated meeting. "We're asking you to see that the two are intertwined. A safe guest is a returning guest." Progress came slowly, but each breakthrough was celebrated as a victory. Back in the U.S., Sophia managed the growth of Safe Stays' domestic efforts, which had taken on a life of their own. New chapters were opening in states with high tourism rates, and local activists were trained as Safe Stays representatives. These leaders conducted workshops, distributed guides, and held forums that taught families how to stay aware and advocate for themselves when traveling. One evening, as Sophia presented at a parent-teacher association meeting, a mother approached her afterward. "Thank you," she said, tears brimming in her eyes. "My son has severe asthma, and I never realized how unprepared we were for emergencies when traveling. This has opened my eyes." Sophia's heart swelled with purpose. The work was exhausting but meaningful, and every story reaffirmed their mission. Mia came home from college for the holidays, her presence a bright spot in the whirlwind of work. She brought with her stories of her pre-law courses and volunteer work at a legal clinic that specialized in cases of negligence. "I never realized how much of what you've done with Safe Stays would inspire my studies," she told Ethan over dinner one evening. "I see now that justice isn't just about big courtroom battles, it's in the everyday protections we take for granted." Ethan exchanged a glance with Sophia, pride filling the room like a tangible force. "You're part of that justice, Mia. We started it, but you're taking it to new places." Lucas, now in high school, listened quietly, absorbing the conversation with an intensity that made Ethan smile. His son was growing up to be thoughtful and brave, qualities that would serve him well. A year after the summit in Marrakesh, Amira Hassan invited the Grants back to North Africa to see the impact of their collaborative work. The change was palpable. Resorts that once brushed aside safety measures now touted them as a selling point. Locals had been trained as lifeguards and safety officers, creating job opportunities while making vacation spots safer for both tourists and residents. As they toured a beachside resort that had once declined their training, the manager greeted Ethan warmly. "We were skeptical, but you showed us the path forward. Our guests have noticed, and so have we." Ethan felt a deep sense of fulfillment. It wasn't just a victory for Safe Stays, it was a victory for everyone who believed in the power of action. Safe Stays' influence began reaching into unexpected areas. Cruise lines started adopting similar protocols, using Safe Stays guidelines as a framework for onboard safety. Ethan was invited to speak at an international maritime conference, where he emphasized the importance of vigilance in even the most controlled environments. The session was a success, leading to partnerships with cruise companies that signed pledges to enhance their staff training. Sophia watched from the audience, her eyes glistening with pride as Ethan fielded questions with the confident assurance of a leader who had lived every word he spoke. While many welcomed Safe Stays' efforts, not everyone was supportive. Pushback came from luxury hotel chains worried about the costs and image implications of admitting past failures, One chain in particular launched a public relations campaign that subtly criticized the push for safety reforms as overzealous. Ethan, undeterred, penned an open letter that was published in major newspapers. Ensuring the safety of every guest is not an overreaction, it is a basic expectation. We will continue our work not because it's easy, but because it's right. The letter went viral, spurring a debate that, while intense, pushed safety reforms further into the spotlight. One evening, exhausted from relentless travel and constant advocacy, Ethan sat alone in his hotel room in Tokyo, staring out at the city lights. Doubts crept in, whispering that the fight was too big, the resistance too strong. A message from Mia popped up on his phone. "Remember, change isn't always visible in the moment, but every effort counts. Proud of you, Dad." Ethan felt a surge of renewed energy. He responded, "Thanks, kiddo. I needed that." He stood, his fatigue replaced with determination. Tomorrow was another day to push forward. Sophia spearheaded a new initiative, the Global Safety Consortium, which aimed to unite travel industry leaders, NGOs, and advocacy groups under one umbrella. The consortium's goal was to create universally recognized standards for safety that could be implemented across resorts and hotels worldwide. The first annual meeting was held in New York, drawing hundreds of participants. Ethan opened the conference with a speech that recounted Safe Stay's humble beginnings and the day by the pool that had ignited it all. Every guest, every traveler, deserves more than a safe place to stay. They deserve a commitment from us that their safety is non-negotiable. Safe Stays began hosting workshops not just for resorts, but for the public. These events taught travelers how to recognize safety risks, navigate difficult situations, and understand their rights. Sophia took charge of these workshops, her natural warmth and knowledge captivating attendees. One attendee, a young woman named Elena, shared her story at the end of a session. "I was in an accident abroad last year, and I didn't know what to do or who to turn to. What you're teaching could have changed everything for me." The applause that followed was heartfelt, and Sophia felt a tear slip down her cheek. The mission had always been personal, but hearing stories like Elena's made it real in new, powerful ways. Safe Stays was nominated for an International Humanitarian Award, recognized for its significant contributions to guest safety and human rights. The ceremony was held in Geneva, bringing together advocates and leaders from around the world. When Safe Stay's name was called, Ethan and Sophia walked to the stage together, hand in hand. The room erupted in applause. As they accepted the award, Ethan spoke, his voice steady but full of emotion. "We accept this not for ourselves, but for every family who deserves safety without question. This is for those who have been overlooked and those who will never be again." The momentum continued. Other industries began consulting Safe Stays for guidance on how to improve their own safety practices. Amusement parks, summer camps, and even large sporting events reached out for advice on ensuring their venues were as safe as possible. Ethan realized the movement had grown beyond anything he had imagined. What had started as a fight for his daughter's life had become a commitment to safeguarding countless others. Despite their packed schedules, the Grants made time for each other. Evenings were spent sharing stories around the dinner table, and summer vacations were now trips that combined relaxation with speaking engagements and workshops. Lucas, now graduating from high school, announced his decision to study public health and safety. "I want to help shape policies that keep people safe, just like you both have," he told Ethan and Sophia one evening. They embraced him, their hearts full. "We couldn't be prouder," Sophia said, her voice catching. 5 years after that fateful day, the Grants were invited back to Sunrise Sands for a commemorative event celebrating the resort's transformation and commitment to safety. The resort now served as a model for others, its journey a testament to change. Walking past the pool, Ethan felt a pang of nostalgia mixed with pride. The same place where his daughter had faced danger was now a symbol of victory and vigilance. Helen Brooks, now retired but attending the event, approached Ethan and Sophia. "I owe you both an apology and a thank you," she said, her voice sincere. "You showed us how to be better." Ethan smiled, the past forgiven in the face of progress. We did it together. Mia, now in her third year of law school, joined them at the event. She spoke to guests about the importance of accountability and transparency in guest safety, her words carrying the weight of personal experience. The crowd listened intently, recognizing that her generation would carry forward the legacy of vigilance. "It's not just about what we fix now," Mia said. "It's about what we teach the next generation, that their voices matter and their safety is worth fighting for." Safe Stays expanded further, setting up offices in South America, Africa, and Asia. The partnerships with local communities helped adapt the safety standards to unique cultural contexts. Reports came in of incidents that were successfully prevented because of training implemented by Safe Stays. Sophia often read these reports aloud to Ethan at night, their significance never lost on them. Every saved life, every prevented tragedy was a victory. The Grants received an invitation to the White House, where they were to be honored for their contributions to public safety. The event was attended by policymakers, industry leaders, and advocacy groups who had been influenced by Safe Stays' work. Standing at the podium, Ethan reflected on the journey. "What we've learned is that safety is not static, it evolves, and it takes all of us, working together, to keep making it better." Ethan and Sophia began offering mentorships through Safe Stays, guiding young advocates on how to build their own safety initiatives. They developed a scholarship fund in Mia's name for students studying law, safety, and public health, ensuring that the next generation had the support they needed to continue the fight. Mia, touched by the gesture, said during the fund's launch, "This isn't just about honoring the past, it's about investing in a future where safety is an expectation, not an exception." 5 years after the launch of Safe Stays, data showed a marked improvement in safety protocols across participating resorts. Incident reports of negligence dropped significantly, and guest satisfaction surveys reflected a new trust in the industry. Ethan kept copies of those reports, a tangible reminder of what dedication could achieve. But he also knew that complacency was the enemy of progress. Safe Stays continued to innovate, finding new ways to make safety accessible and intuitive. The Grants learned to balance their demanding work with personal moments of joy. They took weekend hikes, explored national parks, and even tried their hand at camping, a venture that provided both hilarity and cherished memories. Lucas, now a college student, joined them whenever he could. The family stayed close, united by the experiences that had defined them, but not limited to them. Life was more than the fight. It was also about what came after, the peace they had created together. A call from an international organization brought an unexpected opportunity. The Global Tourism Board wanted Ethan to co-author a set of worldwide safety standards. It was a chance to cement Safe Stays' influence at a global level. As he sat with the board in Geneva, contributing his insights and expertise, Ethan thought about the path that had led him there. From the terrifying day at Sunrise Sands to this moment, shaping global policy. It felt surreal but deserved. Sophia's influence in Safe Stays was undeniable. Her workshops evolved into a full-fledged course offered in universities titled Community Safety and Advocacy. She taught the course herself in its inaugural year, drawing on stories from their journey. "I want my students to understand that advocacy isn't a job, it's a calling," she said to a packed lecture hall. Her students listened, inspired not just by the material, but by her passion. A major film company approached the Grants with an idea, a documentary that would detail the rise of Safe Stays, showing the power of advocacy in action. Ethan and Sophia agreed, knowing that visual storytelling could inspire even more people. The film, titled Ripple of Safety, premiered at international film festivals and garnered attention for its raw portrayal of the challenges and triumphs faced by the Grants. It concluded with a shot of Mia and Lucas standing on the shore, facing the horizon, symbols of a future that promised continued change. At a global summit 10 years after the founding of Safe Stays, Ethan delivered what many would later call his defining speech. "We started this journey with one goal, to make sure no family would face what ours did without support, without advocacy. We didn't just make a difference, we built a foundation. And as I look out at all of you, I know that this legacy will continue long after we're gone. The standing ovation that followed echoed the journey's trials and victories. Ethan stepped down from the stage, taking Sophia's hand. Their work wasn't over, but it had become something greater than they could have ever imagined. A movement, a legacy, a promise kept.